The last entry in the Velan Collegium's field register for survey expedition on D7 reads as follows: Sector boundary confirmed. Border markers intact. Chart amendment pending review. That is all. 12 words. The review was never requested. The chart amendment was never filed. I know, because I wrote those words myself, 31 years ago, in the cold of a survey barge whose instruments had stopped functioning at the precise moment I crossed into the region the older charts simply called the Unmarked Reach. I am Verathondes, 3rd Surveyor, retired. I have given lectures at 4 academies. I have corrected 17 errors in the Galactic Standard Atlas. I have extended the known chart by 11 sectors over a career of 40 years, and every single one of those extensions is precise, annotated, cross-referenced, and filed. I do not leave surveys incomplete. I do not forget to file reports. I am telling you now because the Collegium is sending another expedition. They have found a young surveyor, talented, I am told, meticulous, the sort of mind that sees gaps in the chart as an invitation. I know that mind. I had it once. I am asking you to make sure this letter reaches her before she crosses the boundary marker. I was sent to extend the border chart at the edge of what the Collegium calls Sector 41, the deep spinward reaches, far past the shipping lanes, far past the Vithrone relay chains, into a band of space where the trade records thin to nothing and the survey marks simply stop. Not because we ran out of territory to chart, because every expedition that went further stopped sending data back. We assumed equipment failures, sensor degradation in the high radiation fringe, the usual excuses that busy institutions prefer to unsettling ones. I assumed the same. I was thorough, methodical, and 37 years old, and I had never once encountered a gap in the chart that was not eventually explained by instrument error, bad data, or a surveyor who had not checked his baseline calibrations. We crossed the outer boundary marker on the 42nd day of the expedition. I remember the moment precisely, not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. The boundary marker was a standard Collegium relay beacon, amber pulse, 12-second interval, catalogue number stenciled on the housing. My assistant, a junior surveyor named Delv Orith, recorded it in the log without looking up. My navigator, Sir Ren, plotted the next waypoint. I noted the beacon's timestamp and began preparing the extension chart. It was 6 hours before I realized the chart was wrong. Not wrong in the way of bad instrument readings. Wrong in the way of a map that has been drawn by someone who did not want to draw it accurately, who drew what they were willing to say out loud and left the rest blank. I had the old surveys in the archive terminal. I pulled the oldest one, filed under a surveyor whose name I no longer remember because the Collegium expunged it after his 3rd failure to file a complete report, and I saw what he had done. He had drawn the boundary. He had noted the relay beacon. And then, in the margin, in the cramped notation style of the older generation, he had written 2 words that I initially dismissed as instrument artifact or personal notation. He had written, asterisk they know dot asterisk. I dismissed it. I filed it as eccentric margin note, the kind of thing a surveyor writes when he has been alone in deep space too long, and I went back to my chart extension. 48 hours past the boundary marker, the instruments began doing something I had never seen in 14 years of active survey work. They did not fail. They continued to function perfectly. Power draw nominal, sensor arrays responsive, calibration checks passing. But the data they returned was geometrically impossible. Not wrong readings. Not degraded signal. The readings describe a region of space in which distances were exactly what they should be, and yet somehow the objects within that region were both exactly where the charts indicated they should be and also, simultaneously, attending to us. That is the only word I have been able to use in 31 years of quiet reflection. Attending. As though the space itself had looked up. I told myself it was a sensor artifact. I told myself it was the radiation fringe. I told Delv and Suren nothing, because there was nothing to tell. My instruments were functioning, my data was clean, and I was a 3rd surveyor of the Velan Collegium and I did not report feelings. On the 51st day, we passed the first marker that was not in any chart. Not a Collegium beacon. Not a trade relay. Not any structure I recognized from the Vithrone Standard Catalogue, or the old Dreven survey records, or any of the 11 alien construction typologies I had studied during my training. It was a structure approximately 3 times the mass of our survey barge, positioned precisely at the midpoint between 2 stars whose relationship I had just finished charting, and it was oriented, not toward the stars, not toward the nearest gravitational anchor, but toward us. Had been oriented toward us, I realized when I ran the timestamp against our approach vector, for approximately 19 hours before we arrived, before we could have appeared on any conventional sensor array. I logged it. I kept my voice flat when I called the reading to Delve. I pulled up the standard catalog and made a show of checking it against known typologies, knowing before I finished the first search that I would find nothing. What I did not do, what I should have done, what I have had 31 years to regret not doing, though I am no longer certain it would have changed anything, was change course before the structure responded. Because it responded. Not in any way I can describe as communication. No signal. No light. No detectable emission across any frequency my instruments could read. What happened is this. The orientation of the structure, which had been fixed on our approach vector, shifted. Slowly, in real time, across 11 minutes, the structure pivoted, not away from us, but into a new angle that I eventually identified as matching the heading of our home port at Velan Prime. It had been watching where we were going. Now it was watching where we had come from. Seren saw it happen. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, "It knows where we live." I told her to log the reading. She logged it. She did not look up from her console again for 2 hours. Seren asked me what it was. I told her it was a navigational aid of unknown origin and logged it as such. My voice did not waver. My hands did not tremble. I was a professional. I stayed awake for the next 31 hours and I read every document in the archive terminal, including the files marked Restricted Survey Internal that I was not supposed to access without Collegium authorization, and by the end of those 31 hours I understood 3 things. The first, every surveyor who had crossed the boundary marker and returned had returned without a completed report. Not one exception in 107 expeditions spanning approximately 600 years of Velan survey history. I want you to hold that number, 107, because I spent a long time with it in that archive terminal and I still hold it myself. 107 expeditions, each one sent by an institution full of intelligent, methodical people who looked at the previous expedition's missing report and decided the next expedition would be more thorough, better equipped, better briefed. 107 expeditions, each one ending with 12 words or less, and not a single director of the Collegium in 6 centuries had looked at that pattern and asked what was producing it. We are a species that loves completeness. We finish our surveys. We file our reports. The fact that none of us had ever, in 600 years, filed a report from that sector, that is not instrument degradation. That is a consistent decision made by 107 surveyors who crossed the same boundary and arrived at the same conclusion about what should and should not be said out loud. The second, 3 of those surveyors, on separate expeditions spanning 4 centuries, had independently written the same 2-word margin notation in 3 different Velan script variants, because the script had changed 3 times in 600 years. The notation was identical in meaning across all 3. I will not repeat it here because I do not wish to put it in writing again, even now. The third, the 6 expeditions that did not return had each, in their final transmitted data packet, noted the same anomaly I had noted, a structure not in any chart, oriented toward them before they arrived. Ours was the 41st returned expedition. We had not yet transmitted a final data packet. I woke Seren at the 4th hour of morning watch and told her to plot a return course to the boundary marker and to do it immediately and without discussion. She started to say something about the survey schedule. I told her, quietly and without any particular emphasis, that the survey was complete. She looked at me for a long moment. Seren was an experienced navigator, not easily unsettled, and then she plotted the course without another word. I believe she had noticed the structure's pivot. I believe she had been waiting, as I had been waiting, to see who would say it first. There was one survey record in the archive that I read 3 times before I closed the terminal. It was filed by a surveyor named in the Collegium registry as Expedition Chief Oravath, 212 years ago, one of the 107. Her final report was 9 words, boundary noted. No survey extension indicated. Returning to home port. 9 words. Oravath had spent 41 years at the Collegium before that expedition. She had filed 631 reports in that career. The shortest previous report she had ever filed was 44 words. After the expedition, she filed 3 more reports, routine inventory submissions, a maintenance requisition, a leave request, and then retired. The Collegium's personnel file noted she had been an able and thorough professional. No record exists of anyone ever asking her what she had found in Sector 41. I closed the terminal and I did not open it again. We did not speak about it on the return passage. We did not speak about it after we crossed back through the boundary marker. We did not speak about it when we docked at the relay station, or when we filed our arrival report with the Collegium's regional office, or when we returned to Velan Prime and I sat down to write the survey report that I have never, in 31 years, written. What I wrote instead was 12 words. Sector boundary confirmed. Border markers intact. Chart amendment pending review. And then I put the file away and I waited, and eventually everyone forgot to ask. Delv Oreth left survey work the following year. He became a trade route administrator, a good one, by all accounts, well regarded, never spoke publicly about the expedition. Suren filed for navigator reassignment and spent the rest of her career on inner system runs, short-range work, nothing past the third relay ring. I asked her once, perhaps 8 years later, over a meal in a Harbour District refectory on Velan Prime, whether she thought about it. She picked up her cup. She set it down. She said, "I think about the structure knowing where we were going to be." Then she paid for the meal and left, and I did not see her again for 11 years, and when I did we talked about the weather. I am retired now. I have a small house in the coastal uplands of the second continent, and I grow things that do not ask questions, and I have not looked at a survey chart in 4 years. I keep one chart on the wall of my workroom, an old one, printed on vellum composite, the style from before the digital atlas transition. It shows the whole of the known Velan survey range, sector by sector, in careful color-coded notation going back 3 centuries. It is a beautiful chart. Every surveyor I have ever respected contributed to it. It has a blank region at the spinward edge. The notation there is minimal. The standard Collegium designation for unsurveyed space, 3 small symbols that mean asterisk data pending asterisk in the old notation system. Nobody who has not been there would look twice at it. It looks like every other gap in a partially completed chart. I added one notation to it, 4 years ago, in the margin where the blank region begins. In the old cramped script style, the one my generation learned before the transition. 7 words. I will tell you what they say, because you will ask, and because it is the only thing I have to give the young surveyor that will not sound like the ravings of a man who has been alone too long. The notation says, asterisk the space here is already looking back dot asterisk. That is the honest chart note. That is the survey record I should have filed 31 years ago, and did not, because I was a third surveyor of the Velan Collegium and there was no notation code in the standard catalogue for what I had seen. There still is not. I checked last year. Please give the young surveyor my letter before she crosses the boundary marker. Not because I believe it will stop her. I would not have been stopped, at 37, by a letter from an old man who had not filed his report. I know what a gap in the chart looks like to a mind like hers. I had that mind. Give her the letter so that she knows, when she crosses and the instruments begin to do what they do, that she is not the first. That someone came back before her. That the notation in the margin was not instrument artifact. And that whatever she finds out there, whatever it is that knows, before she arrives, where she is going to be, whatever attended to us for 6 hours before we even reach the boundary marker, it has been attending for a very long time. Tell her to come home. Tell her to file 12 words and come home.